to come along and get some further information about the Queen's Platinum Jubilee. My name's Mandy Bishop. For those of you that don't know me, I'm the Chief Operating Officer at the Council. I hope you find this session today helpful. Our aim is to be as helpful as possible and to make it as easy as possible for you and your communities to support the Queen's Platinum Jubilee celebrations. So without further ado, I'm going to hand back over to Sarah, who I think will tell us, I think we're going to give you a little bit of information to start with, to just talk you through some of the processes and then give you an opportunity if you just want to use it as an open Q&A session as well. So Sarah, shall I hand back over to you and Alison just to give a bit of an overview of the running order? So lovely to see you all again.
Thanks, Mandy. Yeah, so we've divided this session up into 3 parts, if that's okay. So we've got a couple of speakers to talk about sort of a bit of context in terms of the legislation and statutory duties in terms of events and the health and safety and risk assessments. We'll then have a bit of a pause where you can ask some questions. And then we go into the sort of second part, which is the application process, the licensing, the event classifications, and then road closures. Again, we'll have a little bit of a pause, and then we'll go on to sort of other considerations that you need to think about in terms of your event planning. So there will be time to ask questions. So if you could give the speakers a little time just to give their brief overview, and then we'll pause, and then we'll take some questions. Do put information in the chat and comments in the chat. If we can't answer them today, or we run out of time, we'll come back to you at a later time. So if we don't get round to answering the questions, we will respond back to you. So thanks very much. Thanks for your patience. We're hoping it'll only last about an hour and a half at the most. So appreciate this is lunchtime. So if you have got sandwiches, and do please eat your sandwiches and drink your tea while we're going through the presentations. We will circulate the presentations afterwards as well, if there are any. And if you need any more information, then obviously we can circulate that afterwards. So I think the first up is Sarah Chivers, if that's okay. So we've got a couple of presentations, and then we'll take some questions. Over to Sarah.
Morning everyone, or afternoon everyone, sorry. My name's Sarah Chivers. I'm Senior Environmental Health Officer with the Public Protection Team at the Council. I am the lead officer for the enforcement of health and safety at work. So I am a health and safety inspector. And I'm just here to give you a bit of an overview of your sort of statutory duties and when they do and do not apply. Health and safety has come a bit of a phrase and a bit of an umbrella term for anything that people perceive to be safety related. And I certainly feel, from my point of view, that sometimes can be a bit unhelpful. And what an organisation really needs to know is when it applies to them and what they need to do about it. So the Health and Safety at Work Act that I enforce is the overarching bit of legislation, and it only applies in certain circumstances. And generally it applies when an organisation has more than one employee or one or more employee. So in terms of a parish council, I believe you all have a parish clerk, which is a paid for position. So by virtue of that, you have an employee. So the Act is going to apply. That said, it's based on the activities you do, and so it's commensurate to those activities. The Act doesn't apply when you have an organisation that's entirely voluntary, unless you own or manage some form of community building. So a lot of people have a village hall or a social club. So although that may be managed and run by a committee of volunteers, because it gets hired out, you have events in it, people can run other sorts of like play groups, fitness classes, you still have responsibilities under the Health and Safety at Work Act. So what does this mean for events? Well, if you have got a street party going on that your residents may be looking at doing for the Jubilee, the Act doesn't apply. However, if you as a parish council are going to be using your village hall, putting something on in your hall, on your associated playing fields, then the Act will apply. So it's really important to get an overview of what it is you want to do for your events, what the structure is going to look like, so that you can then start to think about, well, what are my statutory duties? So under the Health and Safety at Work Act, there's loads of different bits of regulations which are there to guide you in understanding what you need to do. It's not designed to be difficult, it's not designed to be complicated. What it is designed to do is to make you think about all the things that you should be considering when organising an event, really. So I think the other area that confuses people is health and safety legislation is criminal legislation. And you also have there is a civil law, which I think is what people get most concerned about, because this is where people, can sue you because they've fallen over. But the two are very different. So it's important to kind of know which framework you're operating in. So even if you have got a street party and the Health and Safety at Work Act doesn't apply, it doesn't mean people can't, make a claim for some other injury. So it's important to keep the two things quite separate, really. So I'm here as a point of call to give you some advice, point you in the right direction. I have got a couple of links, Alison and Sarah, which I'll forward to you, which gives a bit of an overview as to the difference between the two bits of legislation, how it applies, and it will signpost you to some other areas on the Health and Safety Executive website, which will be of use to you. But that is all really I want to say about the framework, and I will be here in the next bit to give you some further advice on risk assessment and what practical things that you can do to help your event go smoothly.
Thanks, Sarah. I think we've now got Imogen and Tracy, I think, that are going to do something on health and safety and risk assessments. And I think, Sarah, you are probably going to chip in as well, if that's okay. So we've just got 10 minutes for this little session, and then we'll take some questions at that point. We'll just have a pause and take some of your questions. So over to Imogen and Tracy.
Thanks, Sarah. So good afternoon, everybody. I'm Tracy Curtis, and whilst I'm also a health and safety advisor, my role differs slightly to Sarah, whereas Sarah does the enforcement for the authority. I'm the health and safety manager internally, so I've got a slightly different role to that Sarah's already described there. We do get involved, as you'd imagine, in risk assessments and the likes, and I do dip in with our events team, but they're really the ones who can support you through the process. And I'm sure Imogen's going to be catching up with you about the events app. But I think once you're into your work on the risk assessments, that we're hopefully somebody else you could contact just to support you through them if necessary. But that's really all I wanted to do, because I think Sarah's outlined already where the differences lie and the pointers that you need to be thinking of when you're doing your events. But I'm going to be about for all of the presentations, so I'll be about to chip in if you've got any questions specifically for me. Is that all right? If I hand over to Imogen, I jumped in there, Imogen, sorry.
That's okay, Tracy, thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm Imogen Coles. I'm one of the specialist food safety officers. I lead on food safety at the events. I'm just going to give you a few sort of brief points on key considerations that they would need to consider. These sort of single events, one-off sort of street parties or charity events, say fetes, fundraisers, don't have to require to be registered with the council. However, they still need to ensure that they are providing safe food on the day and they are complying with food safety, hygiene and law. So the first thing to consider is, are those making the food and serving it suitably trained and have a good knowledge of food hygiene? Although a food hygiene certificate, a level 2 certificate, isn't a legal requirement. It is something we would still expect, say, the main caterer to do, or those handling open high-risk foods to complete. And they can access these online. They range between about £15 and £40, and we have a list of trainers that they could access. One of the key considerations for an event is that they're able to provide allergy information for any consumers eating the food. It allows them to make sort of informed and safe choices. Now, the food labelling regulations, you may have heard of the new pre-packed direct sale regs, Tasha's law, that cover wrapped food, and it requires ingredients list, name of the product and allergens, only is applied to those premises that are registered and food businesses are registered. However, we'd still want them to ensure at an event that they're providing allergen information. So they can do this really simply. So say it was a buffet, they could provide a list of allergens in the foods and the name of the food, or a number of lists on the table if there's lots of food that's displayed. If they had some, say, cakes that are packed completely, say cling filmed, that people can take away, they provide a label with the name of the food and the allergens in the food. We'd also ask our caterers to make sure that they've got good hand wash facilities, particularly at the point where they're catering, so, or handling food such as a barbecue. They could be handling raw and cooked food. So they need to make sure they're washing their hands, and a simple bowl with hot and cold water, soap and towels would be adequate. We've asked that they ensure that they are monitoring any sort of temperature control for hot and cold temperatures. So if they are bringing food on to a street event from made in another kitchen, that they are providing a temperature gauge into the cool box, and they are monitoring the temperatures of the fridges and the freezers that they're using for storage, and that any food for a buffet is kept out for a limited time, ideally within the 4-hour rule. They can also use probe thermometers for any hot cooked high-risk foods on a barbecue, burgers, spit roast for chicken, that sort of thing. And what we ask them to do is to provide some simple sanitizers and cleaners so they can effectively sort of clean down surfaces, particularly where they've got raw and high-risk food and any allergenic foods. That's really important. So what they need to do is to assess the food that they're going to be making. Is it high or low risk? Look at their menus, decide on some safe practices from when they purchase the food to how they'll serve it. And we ask that they get those things into place, I would say about a maximum of sort of 6 weeks before the event takes place. I'll put some guidance advice on everything I've talked about today that I'll send to Alison after the presentation, which should be a helpful guide for food safety for the events. So thank you.
So I'll just touch on risk assessment for your event. People get a bit tied up in knots about the terminology under health and safety regulations, and your risk assessments are no different. All it really is to look at what your activity is and what are the risks associated with that activity. And for most of the things that you're going to be putting on, it's going to be pretty much everyday tasks, but you've got to remember it's going to be done for the public. So you will have a duty to make sure that you've considered all of the context that you're putting everything in. So you may be putting on, a tea stall. So you'll be using a hot water urn. You'll be looking at, where do you place it? Is the table sturdy enough? How are we going to get power to it? How is someone going to fill up it with water? It's all those practical things you just want to think about. And so the key element in any event, successful event, is really looking at the framework of that event. What is it you want to do? What do you want to achieve? And how many people you are going to need to help you organise that. So events have a funny way of managing to start off as one thing and ending up being something completely different. And this is generally where things go a little awry. So it's really key to get your planning in order first before you start going off and looking at your sort of practical solutions. So breaking down your event into different areas, getting people to sort of take control or manage that particular element, and get them to think about all the things that they need to consider. And as I said, it will generally be, you know, placement of things. How do you get power to stuff if you need it? And also about timely engagement of services. So certainly after last summer, there was a very significant demand for certain things such as, you know, extra toilets, generators, all sorts of things like that. So it's really, really key to get those things in now and get them in place. Another area that was very popular is the use of inflatable devices. So as we know, the bouncy castle. Please, please, please ensure that this is thought about very carefully, as they are really fun and really popular, but they do have some significant downsides if they're not managed carefully. So there is extensive guidance on this, and it is really around making sure that where you've hired it from is reputable, and that it is inspected before it's used, and that it's also supervised. Supervision is really key, and it's something that if an organizer is wanting to put one of these on as part of their event, that they need to take ownership of supervising that, either by using the company they've hired it from to do that for them, or by ensuring you have got a system of making sure you can do that yourselves. There is a bit of a cautionary tale. There was a pub, not in our area, but in a neighbouring authority, who prosecuted the pub because the bouncy castle that was in use was in very poor condition. It hadn't been managed or maintained. It wasn't supervised, and a child came off that and sustained life-changing injuries as a result. So it's something that it does happen. It shouldn't happen because there are enough sensible controls that can be put into place to avoid that scenario. But it does happen, and that's certainly something we don't want to have happen to any of our events here. So it's something just needs a lot of consideration, really, and it shouldn't be difficult to put those controls in place. So risk assessment is very key. Making sure you have reputable suppliers is really key. Making sure that you have a framework in place to help organise and manage, and making sure that you have a list of scenarios of if your event's going to be outside. We know what the British weather's like. It can be a little bit changeable. Making sure you've considered different scenarios and who is going to make the decisions about certain things. It's really key. So having that sort of chain of command through is really, really key, because quite often as things grow, it can get a little bit unwieldy and people aren't sure, you know, they thought so-and-so was doing that and actually it turns out it was, you know, someone else. So having that framework is also really, really important. I think that's all to say from me, really. If anyone's got questions, then by all means, please ask and I will try and answer. It's very difficult to give exact scenarios and exact solutions because I look at every case on its merit, really. And, you know, I as an inspector, I won't ever say, you know, you can't do something particularly. It will be more around, have you thought of X, Y, and Z? Have you considered this, and this? To give you a way of looking at your solutions to that problem. Unfortunately, quite often it ends up being translated back that, oh, well, health and safety said no. But what we're actually saying is you maybe haven't looked at all of the options properly, and perhaps you need to go and reconsider. And if you can't cover all those things, perhaps, you know, you should be coming to the conclusion that it's not the most appropriate thing to do at that time. So I'll hand back to Alison and Sarah.
Thanks, Sarah. Hopefully we haven't frightened everybody off. We're still here, so that's a good sign. Is there any questions for Sarah, Imogen and Tracy? They're going to stay on the call, so if you've got a thought as we go through, then we can go back to it. But any questions at this point before we move on to part 2, really, the practical licensing and process? Phil, is that your hand up? If you come off mute.
Thank you. Just a quick one. Does the risk assessment that we do across the events have to be published before the event in order for it to be a supportive enough document?
There is no requirement to have a risk assessment written. However, saying that, I think it's a really useful process for you as an organisation to be able to kind of see something visually. And quite often, you know, one person will look at it and then someone else will come across and go, oh, well, actually, have you thought about this? Or what about this? So it's, you know, it's very much a live, ongoing process. And events are very live and ongoing. And even on the day, you might find, well, we've set it up here and actually, for some reason or other, it just doesn't work very well. We need to change it. So, you know, just because it's written down doesn't mean that's set in stone and that's what should happen. You know, things will change, invariably change, but it just gives you a bit of, it gives a framework for people to then see, well, actually, this is what we need to do.
Thanks, Sarah. Does that answer your question, Phil? Is that okay?
Yes, thank you. Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks. Any other questions? I'm just going through the screens. We've got two screens here, so apologies if I'm missing. Is that Viv? Vi, sorry, Vi. You'll need to come off mute if that's okay. It's the button probably to your screen on the right-hand side.
Better?
That's lovely. Thank you.
What happens in the case of literally a street party where the street bring along the food? So like it's bring along a plate of food to share. Where do we stand with the food regulations then?
Hi, Viv. Hi. Well, it's a difficult one, isn't it? Because they're bringing it onto the site. But the organizer for the event would need to make sure that the food that they're bringing on is safe for those consuming it. So we would ask that allergen information is provided for the food. So if it's brought on and displayed, that they are able to provide food allergen information if people ask about what's in the food. That would be very important.
Okay.
Very crucial.
Okay, any other questions? Just quickly going around. No? Okay, I'm going to take that as a no, and we'll move on to the next section if that's all right. So I'm going to hand over to Jeff Cannon, who's going to talk to you about licensing, and then we've got, I think, Linda from our events team will talk to you about event classifications and considerations, and then we've got Paul Garrett, Neil Terry and Andy Dunn, who will then talk about road closures, and then we'll pause again for some more questions. So, but if you're thinking of a question while people are talking, do put it in the chat and we can pick that up also. So over to Jeff. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. My name's Jeff Cannon. I'm a licensing officer for Bath North East Somerset Council, and it's lovely to see so many parish councils engaging in this meeting, which is very helpful. So, of course, you're all probably wondering, with whatever event you are planning, are you going to need a license or not? And what we say in licensing is, more to the point, will you need authorization for any licensable activities? And this will depend on the size of the event and possibly the timing and possibly where you're going to have it. So if you are planning an event that doesn't have more than 500 people outside, okay, and you're going to have licensable activity, for instance, the sale of alcohol or some sort of music. Now, when we get into the music side of things, deregulation comes into this, and there's all different scenarios that can apply. I don't intend to go through all of those. You can always contact us at licensing, and obviously we will guide you as to whether you would need a license or not. But if I keep it fairly simple and say you're going to have a street party or something like that, but you intend to sell alcohol at that street party or whatever, and it's less than 500 people, you can do that by way of what's called a temporary event notice. Okay, there is a bit of a caveat coming to that though in a minute if it's on the street. If it's a much larger event, and this is important, that you're planning, and say for instance you want to take over a whole park and you're going to have various sort of musical activities, live bands, DJs, that kind of thing, you know, a bit of a festival atmosphere if you like, and bars there, and you're going to have more than 500 people to that event, you are going to need to designate that area as a premises. So that means you're going to need a premises license. You'll have to apply for a premises license. Okay. When you do that, the cost of the application is tied into the domestic rateable value of the premises, and I think in all cases, I think a field comes in at £100. The costs are on our website, and I'm going to provide that link to Alison. So Alison, you can put that out so everybody can go to the licensing web pages and have a look to see what's involved there. So for a larger event, if you apply for a premises license, there is a 28-day consultation period. And again, this is another important aspect, and Sarah touched on this. Timing is important, because if you have to apply for a premises license, for instance, we run the 28-day consultation process. If there are objections, and this is where people have got called out in the past, planning events, then that's going to be delayed even further, because we would probably have to take the application to a licensing subcommittee to determine as part of the democratic process. Okay, so talk to your organisers, talk to whoever's involved, and if you're planning a big, larger scale event and you recognise you need a premises licence, you need to apply for a premises licence, please get that application in well in advance of the event. Okay. Where you don't need a premises license is if you are having live unamplified music between the hours of 0800 and 2300. Now, I don't know if anybody's planning going past 11 o'clock at night, but if you're not, and it's unamplified music, so you just got a, I don't know, a solo player playing a guitar or something like that, and no amplification, you don't need a license at all. That's deregulated. If you're planning on amplified music, 0800 to 2300, on a premises that's already licensed to sell alcohol, you don't need a license. I say it's getting a bit complicated already, isn't it? And if you're planning on amplified live music between 0800 and 2300 for less than 500 people, you don't need a license. I've probably confused you already. Don't worry, it's all there on the website, and I am a point of contact. I can take you through this and guide you if you get in contact with us, okay? But the important thing to take from this is, can I authorise what I need to do by way of a temporary event notice? So that is less than 500 people, including any performers, staff, and your audience. If it's going to be a much bigger event, you need to look at, do I need a premises licence? Now, one thing you can do is you can all go away and go back to your village halls or whatever and dust off your premises licence that you've probably got for your village halls and other buildings that parish councils tend to use, or any building where you have activities that you may want to do something for the Jubilee. If you've got a premises licence already in existence for that building, you could probably use that. But what you need to do is dust that off, have a look. Is that license going to be fit for purpose for what you are intending? If not, then you could either, if it's less than 500 people, put in for a temporary event notice to cover the event, or if it's going to be more than 500 people in the building, probably unlikely, then we'd have to look at varying the license. Again, another whole process which I'm not going to go into, but have a look at the premises licenses that exist that you've got for indoor activities for those types of buildings, and you may find you're already covered. Hope that makes sense. A couple of other little things to throw in. I'm not aware that the Platinum Jubilee has changed anything regarding legislation to do with licensing and things like charity street collections, because it's interesting when somebody mentioned something about possibly doing a collection of charity. Well, if you're doing it on a street, so at a street party, as far as I'm aware, if this changes, we will let you know, you're still going to need to apply for a charity street collection, which again, all the information is on our licensing pages on our website. And if you're selling any goods, so that can include a bar, as I understand at the moment, on a street, because all streets are designated in Baines as consent streets for the purposes of street trading, then as far as I'm aware, you're going to need street trading consent as well to sell any goods on a street. Again, if that's changed or changes as a result of the Platinum Jubilee, I'll let you know, but that's how I see it at the moment. And again, as well, I don't think any of you are going to be planning having markets, but if you did want an outdoor market as part of your event, that's street trading, that's selling goods on the street. You need to apply for a street trading consent to cover a market. All a bit complicated, I'm afraid. Don't want to bamboozle you. As I say, we're here. There's information on the website, and of course, I can always answer questions in a bit as best I can, and give you some advice as we go along later in the, at a later date. So I think I'll leave it at that for now, because I'm sure there'll be some questions coming up out of all of that. Okay, Alison.
Thanks, Jeff. I think it's on to Linda, isn't it? Yeah. That's right.
Yeah, hi everybody. Great to see so many people turning out today. I'm hoping it will mean that there's going to be lots of events happening in the area. I'm hoping that my internet holds. Zoom likes to cut me out at the 40-minute mark. So if that happens, I might ask Eleanor or Jenny to jump in. So as mentioned before, that if you're just planning to do a street party, you just need to fill out an application form. And that is just for residents only on your street. And that application form can be done through our highways department. And the application is free of charge to do. But if you are planning to do anything bigger than this, that might be a little bit more complex, or have attendees that are outside of residents on your street, then you will need to submit an application to our events office. So that's additional things, could be anything that were previously mentioned, such as food, music, such as bands, inflatables, toilets. And as Sarah mentioned earlier, I would just highlight that if you are planning to get additional toilets, to make sure to book them in straight away, because there is a nationwide shortage of them. So you want to get on that as soon as possible. So the process for submitting an application is done through an application called Event App, which I can share links to for this again. And on Event App, we would ask you to submit your event management plan, your risk assessments, insurance details, and depending on the size and scope of your event, site plans and possibly a traffic management plan. We do have templates for all of these documents. So they're very, very user-friendly to use. They all have different segments within them with questions, so you just need to fill it out. And again, if you're just hoping to hold a small event, we just need basic details of schedules and key contacts, but all of that is listed within these templates. And I can, of course, share links to these templates as well. The purpose of putting it onto Event App means that we can share these documentations with our Safety Advisory Group for Events, which is shortened to SAGE. Now, SAGE encompasses a group of public servants such as the police, fire and rescue, health and safety, public health, highways, waste management, parks, and lots of other important people who are there to offer advice and suggestions so that you can carry out your event in the safest way possible. On the event app, there is a communication forum as well. So either myself or one of my colleagues will be able to communicate with you the whole way through the process. And we will then be able to relay the information that our stage group have commented on your application, and then we can feed that back to you and then work with you to make sure that your event is running in the safest means possible. If your event is on private land, we still will need to know about your event, so you still will need to notify us about it. If it is a big event or affecting highways, we will still need you to submit an application through Event App. If your event is less than 500 people, the application fee will be £80 plus that. If it's a major event, so meaning more than 500 people, then it's £160 plus VAT. And all your full and final documentation will be required 8 weeks in advance, along with that administration fee. So it sounds like a scary process, but I promise you we will be there with you the whole way through. It's actually not that difficult, and you can set up an event application straight away. Even if you have just draft documentations, you can stick them up there straight away. We can take a look at them. They won't be submitted, but we can work through them with you. We have a couple of very experienced event organisers here who are more than happy to help you along the way. I will say that as Jeff mentioned, there are additional services that, depending on your event, you may need to apply for. And we would ask that you apply for them perhaps 10 weeks in advance, just because there can be a bit of a lengthy process in it. So it's best to get them in as soon as possible. So those would include the traffic management plans, any TENS licensing for music, as mentioned, street trading and street collection. And Jeff, of course, will be happy to talk you through those applications. You will also need to notify people within your locality. So you will need to consult with local residents and businesses, which can be done through the resident associations in Bath. And also you'll need to consult with your BANES, local BANES ward councillors. And that has to be done, and permission has to be sought before the end of March. I think that is everything in our process. I know it sounds like an awful lot of information, but if you want to get in touch with us, you can do so by emailing our team at event, EVENT, at batnes, bathnes.gov.uk. So I'll put that email up there, and then I can email you, and I'll also share the links with Alison for all of those documentations that I've mentioned that we require, and also a link to our website, which will break down the process that I've just talked about in a lot more detail, so you can go over it yourself and read about it, and everything is there, so you can look through it in your own time. Other than that, I think that's everything from the events team, but if there's anything else, if Jenny or Eleanor would like to jump in to add anything, please feel free to do so. And I'm also happy to take any questions.
Okay, so we take the next section, which is Paul, Neil and Terry and Andy about road closures and parking, and then we can pick up some questions if that's all right. Unless was it Eleanor and your other colleague had anything else to add? Apologies.
No, Linda covered it all. Thanks, Linda.
Brilliant. Great, thank you. Over to you, Paul.
Oh, right, I'm just going to share a couple of slides just to put a bit of information on the screen for you. Okay. So, road closures. I suppose the first thing I want to get across is just to say that the roads, they're not council roads, they're your roads, they're all of our roads. So what we want to do is to actually help you with these events. We're not trying to be an obstruction at all to them going ahead. And for most events, and street parties in particular, it is quite an easy thing to do. So like Linda was just saying, we kind of treat events we split them in two really: street parties for residents only, and then there might be larger Jubilee type events that could be open to anyone. So starting with street parties, first of all, it is pretty simple. So what we're generally thinking about is these would be taking place on residential roads, not generally roads with a lot of through traffic or on bus routes, but roads that are generally residential in nature. And really all that's needed, we would do a legal order to close the road. That has to be done. You can't close a road without a legal order. There's no fee for that. And we have an application form, and that's easily accessible. I think a lot of you might have seen already the Lord Lieutenant's website about Jubilee events, and there's links to our Baines website with the application form that you can get from there. It's quite a small form, it's not a big form to fill in. No requirement for a residential street party to have any public liability insurance, it's optional. And our highway contractor called Volker Highways, they have a good set of road close signs that we could lend to community road closures as well. So it would just be the case that someone would have to go to their depot. We could arrange that with yourselves to go and collect the signs and then put them out. They haven't got an endless supply of those, but it would be on a first come first served basis. But they have got a fair few, and that legally then, once the order's in place and there's a road closed sign, then that road can be legally closed. So when we're talking about a quiet residential road being closed for a street party, there's no need for diversion signing or anything like that. It's just those road closed signs that are needed. Similar to what Linda said about events, if there's a residential road being closed for a street party, then it's up to the organizer to actually inform everyone who is in that part of the road about the event, and to seriously consider any access requirements for people living in that road who might need to come and go during the time of the event. We've put a deadline on applications for road closures for the 22nd of April, and that's just to allow us time to process them all. So there is a legal process at our end to make this traffic order to close the road, and that's really just to make sure that we can get them all done for everyone who wants them, because we are expecting quite a few of these to come in for the Jubilee weekend. So that's street parties. Moving on to events that might be slightly larger, this we would see as being events that might take place in a high street, that might have more activities going on. So again, it does require a road closure order, and for the Jubilee event, we're not going to charge for the road closure order either. But being a larger event, there would be a requirement for public liability insurance. If it's on a road that carries through traffic, it would mean that diversion signing would need to be provided. So that's when it does get a bit more complicated, and then that's when we would need a discussion about where might be an appropriate road to hold an event. So again, the lighter the road is in terms of traffic, the easier it is to do. But if you've got to start diverting traffic onto other roads, then there's a requirement to sign that. And unfortunately, the council can't provide those signs or do the designs as to where the locations need to go. So big events, they often would use a traffic management contractor who would do all that for you. But again, it all depends on each event. Each one's unique and has different requirements. Again, a need for the applicant or the organizer rather, to make sure that any properties affected are contacted in advance, just to make people aware, understand any issues that might be caused by the road closure. And we've also got a deadline for these applications as well for road closures for events. Jubilee events is the 22nd of April. So other issues to consider: if it's a larger event and it might affect a bus route, that's a consideration. We wouldn't normally agree to an event that did disrupt buses unless the bus operator was willing and able to make amendments to their route. So that's a factor to consider. And also for street parties and any event on the highway, need to take account if it falls on a day of rubbish collection or recycling. So contact would then need to be made with the council waste team just to make sure that the access for them can be maintained. So on the whole, it is pretty straightforward to do. We're happy to help, give advice. So and we're just encouraging applications for road closures as soon as possible, really, just because there's probably going to be quite a few of these coming through. A lot of people wanted to hold street parties in particular. And I'll just pass over to my colleague Andy now, who's just going to talk about parking implications.
Thanks, Paul. So Paul's talked about TROs required to close roads. One of the things the roads may have on them might be parking restrictions. Those restrictions might allow parking, or they might control or prohibit it in any particular way. If the parking is prohibited, then it's relatively straightforward. You don't have any, what you won't have is you won't have vehicles parked within your event footprint, which could pose a risk to pedestrians. You may need to have to marshal any vehicles out of the event, for example, if the owners return. One of the services the council also provides is the suspension of parking restrictions where parking can take place, or areas where it's not restricted. So this is particularly the case where there isn't anything on the highway out and about in the rural areas. And you may have seen the use of plastic yellow signs affixed to lampposts, columns, and other fixed street furniture, which advise of a parking suspension. So this is a means within a power to suspend that restriction. We use them where TROs come into effect. Effectively, with a TRO, where you remove any of the parking there, the road is effectively closed. So the parking suspension can help facilitate the introduction of that closure by preventing vehicles from parking in that location prior to that road closure coming into effect. So that's where a vehicle is then parked in that suspended area. The council's officers can attend and issue a penalty charge notice. We're unfortunately not able to generally tow vehicles. There are very specific legal requirements in order to undertake that. The benefits to this is it can help keep your event clear and safe for pedestrians. The signage provides advance notice to motorists. And the signage itself is broadly familiar. As I say, it's been used at all sorts of major events throughout the council, the Bath Half, individual house removals. So it can be scaled up quite readily. The council, my team will install these signs in advance. And there is, of course, a fee for this service. And that fee will obviously vary depending upon the location and the area itself. Typically, it's done on a per bay basis, where we're removing controlled parking, such as a permit holder's bay or a pay in this bay, but where it's undertaken in more rural areas where there's no restrictions, the charges tend to be applied based on staff time. We have to go out there and install the signs. And that's it. You can find more information on these parking suspensions on the council's website as well. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you. Shall we take some questions? If people are able to view the chat, there's some contact details in the chat for the events team, and Jeff has put contacts in for the licensing team that he referred to, and also Mandy's put a link in to reference the Jubilee street parties guidance and recommendations in there from the Somerset Lord Lieutenant's pages. So do have a look at that, but we will follow those up after the session. So is there any questions? Because obviously there's lots of information shared in terms of the process on all sorts of scales of events. So any thoughts, any questions from anybody? Oh, Mandy's fine. Oh, Mandy, sorry, Mandy.
It's me. You know I've always got something to say, Sarah. So thanks everybody for your time today. Like I said, I wonder if what would be quite useful is for us to just put some of the useful links all together in one page at the end of this, because it sounds there's a lot of information we've given you today. I think my message I want to give, if you're putting on a street party, you know, there's a few things we've got to do, but actually it's quite straightforward. It's got to be a genuine street party. And I think obviously you're going to get asked questions on that. I think my other advice is please contact the events team. Please contact colleagues here if you've got any questions early, because they're always happy to help and put things on. And there's some fantastic information on our website for those of you that haven't used it before. So I know Sarah spoke about risk assessments. There's a really simple template there for a health and safety risk assessment, and an example of one that's completed as well. So there's a huge amount of good information on there. But like I said, I have put that email link on, because if you do go to the Somerset Lord Lieutenant's office, it's a really simple, almost takes you through step by step. What do I need to do with food safety? So I'd really encourage you to take communities there as well. And if there's any support we can give you just to make that a little bit simpler with just some relevant links, please do let us know as we go through the Q&A at the moment.
Does anybody want to share what their plans are? It'd be really useful, I think, for colleagues to hear any plans or any thoughts you have. Does anybody want to share any thoughts about any plans? No?
I was going to ask, actually, is anybody planning a larger scale event so that I look out for a premises license application, but it sounds like not at this stage.
And most people, oh, is that Jan? Hi, Jan. Can you find the unmute button? It should be at the top right of your screen. Ah, there we go.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to say that in West Hertfordshire, as the Parish Council, we're supporting the Village Hall Committee, and I would anticipate we're having less than 500 people. The proposal is to carry out the event on the playing field, so that negates the road closure, etc. But it's such an early stage at the moment. We haven't actually agreed anything, that we're still fact finding at the moment. So I just wanted to let you know what our position was.
Thank you, Jan. That's useful. Obviously, you might be looking at a temporary event notice in terms of licensing, depending on what you want to do. Is it a licensable activity is going to take place or not? One thing I forgot to mention, very sorry, temporary event notices cost you £21 a pop, so they're not that expensive. So yeah, you might be looking in that direction. I provided Alison a link to the web pages, to our web pages, where there's loads of information there that can be circulated. And then if you've got any other questions, email into licensing. It'll probably be me that'll pick it up, to be honest, and we'll help take you through it.
Thank you.
Anybody else wanted to share any sort of initial plans or anything? Sharon, thank you.
Hi there. I'm here for Whitchurch Parish Council today. Our clerk's busy, so I said I'd sort of sit in on this one. We're looking at really quite a small event, probably 75 to 100 of our older residents in the village, and we're actually going to hold it in our village community hall. So obviously we won't need road closures. I don't know whether the hall already has a license, so we may be looking at a temporary a license. And we were thinking of doing sort of like a high tea, afternoon tea cakes, you know, but we will be buying alcohol to supply them with as well. They won't be paying for anything. It will all be free to anybody who comes. So in respect to that, listening to all this, our needs are going to be sort of quite small with regard to licensing, I would think.
If you're going to give away your alcohol, which sounds great, I think I'll come.
Well, you have to be over a certain age to get an invite.
I probably am. It's all about the sale of alcohol. If you're literally giving away alcohol for free, you don't need a license. But here's a little caveat: if you are going to ticket an event, if you think of your classic cheese and wine party. Okay,
Yeah.
so you sell tickets, somebody buys a ticket, and included in that ticket price is a glass of wine. I'm afraid that becomes licensable.
No, it's going to be all. It's all going to be free. They will get an invite, but they will not pay to come to it. There's no cost to them at all.
That's great. That's for the sale of alcohol. It's not licensable, and then you just need to look at your entertainment. But probably, I should imagine it's not going to be either. You know, there's various reasons why it could be, but it sounds like it's not. But we can always answer that question. You know, when you're ready to absolutely clear exactly what you're going to do. But it sounds like you won't need a license or a tin. You may have a license already. You just say, dust that off, have a look. That's a plea to everybody. Have a look at your licenses, and you may find you're covered anyway.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Aaron. Is there any other questions or no? Just a reminder of some key dates then. So the events team are looking for proposals. Are you looking for proposals for street parties as well, to know about what's happening for the Jubilee by the end of March? Is that right? Has Linda gone? Can I see her? Oh no, she's there.
Yeah, no, sorry, I'm still here. Yeah, it'd be very good to know about them happening. So we would be like to be made aware of them happening, if possible.
That's great. So that's obviously messages for you to go back to your communities to encourage people to.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, thank you. And there's obviously a deadline as well, also for road closures. Paul referred to the 22nd of April, and obviously consideration for licensing. So there's some key dates for people to think about in terms of feeding back to the council. Is there anything else that people want to share or make comment on? Colleagues from our cleansing team were unable to come to this session today, but we will include it in the follow-up for this session. We'll make sure that information is shared with you from them. If there's no other questions, I'll hand over to Mandy, because she might want to do a bit of a summing up, and then we can end the call quite quickly, if that's all right. And then you can have half an hour back, everybody. Go and eat your lunch properly.
So thanks, Sarah. Can I just say thank you to all of you for your time today as well. You know, as I think Sarah started this by saying, you know, and I'd like to thank the officers that have come along today as well, because our aim is to sort of support you to make sure you get everything through the system and your events are really successful, because that's what we want at the end of the day. So it's been really helpful just having you here, listening to some of the considerations as well. And like I said, we will make sure we get some information out to you with the sort of the key websites and some of the key links that you've seen today. So please do come and speak to us, even if you're just considering an event at this stage. You know, the event officer are always happy to be sort of a single point of contact, and then, you know, we can liaise with colleagues across the council as well, and other statutory partners such as the police and fire. We do that on a regular basis. Or if you have a specific question, obviously licensing, as Jeff said, is quite complex. I'm sure Jeff will be happy to pick that up, or Imogen, anything to do with allergens, and Sarah and the broader sort of health and safety side of it as well. So please do get in touch. Like I said, we all want to have some fantastic events. You know, we've sort of mapped out what's going on nationally and what's going on locally, so it'll be great to hear what you're doing as well. And let's hope, like I said, we all have a really good day and the weather stays nice. That would be the other nice thing, wouldn't it? If we actually have some nice weather. So thank you very much, and thank you for your time today. And like I said, thanks again to the officers as well.
Thanks very much. We'll do a follow-up, and if you need anything else from us, then do let us know. But hopefully you found it useful, and we'll share the link to this video, and please circulate it as wide as possible to your colleagues, and keep in touch and let us know what's happening. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much.
Have a nice afternoon.
Bye everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
I was just going to stay online a minute, Sarah, just to catch up with you about something else, if that's all right. Please
Yeah,
stay,
cool.
Alison.
Sorry, I'm trying to leave.
No, don't worry, that's fine. Sorry, we'll just stop the recording.